Niemand muss in Deutschland kommen und muss sagen, den Frieden wollen wir. Bei Diktaten wirken wir nicht mit. Aber diese ununterbrochene Entrückung lehnen wir ab. Und die Entbehrung ertragen wir nicht.
Hypnotic. That was the best word to describe his voice. He only needed to embellish it with the image constructed by Nazi propaganda of a refined, cultured person with good taste. Thus was created the most effective weapon of the Third Reich. Adolf Hitler convinced millions to trust him blindly. He seemed to have the right answers in a time of enormous turmoil, the German people maintained. Thus emerged the leader. The one who reached the top, and once there he showed who he really was. The one responsible for enormous pain and brutality that is impossible to erase. But on this occasion we will also focus on his intimate life and everything that fed a true monster. An artistic career that ended before it began, conflictive romances and friendships with feared dictators. In today's video, we will learn about the private life of the Führer, his rise, his relationships, and the unconditional support he received from the German people. Stay with us to learn about a new military history.
저는 전쟁터에서 놀지 않습니다. 나는 장군들이 내게 명령을 주는 것을 허용하지 않을 것입니다. 굳은 의지로 공격할 순간을 결정하겠습니다. 그것이 저의 사명입니다.
The whole world remembers Hitler for his important role in World War II and the brutal Holocaust. However, there were several key moments throughout his life that shaped a character as sinister as he was intelligent. That is why, on this occasion, we will try to unravel some of the crucial facts and links that led him to be one of the cruelest dictators in history. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the border of Austria and Germany. His father, Alois, was a customs official, and his mother, Clara Pölzel, was a housewife. He had a difficult childhood, partly due to the severity of his father. He was a mediocre student and failed to complete high school. Although on that path of failure, he showed signs of a strong interest in the arts, especially painting. The death of his father in 1903 and his mother in 1907 left him alone and adrift at just 18 years old. It was at this time that Hitler decided to move to Vienna in the hope of being admitted to the Academy of Fine Arts, but was rejected twice. During his time in the Austrian capital, he lived in poverty, subsisting on odd jobs and selling the paintings he painted himself. The difficult personal situation he was experiencing contributed to a growing feeling of frustration and resentment. In searching for an explanation for his problems, he allowed himself to be influenced by local politicians who pointed out the strong immigration of Jews who supposedly arrived from other parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to steal opportunities from them. In this way, it was in this city where Hitler's visceral hatred was first ignited, and he developed many of his anti-Semitic, nationalist, and racist ideas that would later characterize his political ideology. In 1913, he moved to Munich to avoid compulsory military service in Austria. However, when World War I began on July 28, 1914, he volunteered for the German army. He thought the conflict offered him the opportunity to change his life and finally achieve a significant personal achievement. He served as a messenger on the Western Front, where he was wounded in combat. Despite this, he returned to battle and was recognized for his bravery with the Iron Cross. The conflict also shaped an important part of his personality. His love of war had given him a purpose, and he made clear his stance of respecting superiors and obeying blindly, without question. This made him quite unpopular among his colleagues, who did not tolerate him because while they cursed the conflict, Hitler adored it. Germany's defeat in the conflict and the conditions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles had a profound impact on Hitler. The agreement was signed on June 28, 1919, and not only reduced the losing country's territory, but also imposed monetary fines and caused its demilitarization. This increased resentment toward Jews, who were blamed for the nation's downfall and problems. After the war, Hitler joined the political space of the workers in Munich, which later became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party. He quickly became one of its leading orators and leaders, using his public speaking skills and charisma to attract a growing number of followers.
그 순간의 흥분에 격렬한 외침이 터져 나왔습니다. 너무나 많은 사람들이 그를 그들의 구세주, 견딜 수 없는 가난으로부터의 구원자로 경배합니다.
우리의 임무는 우리의 붕괴를 증언하는 독일 역사의 페이지를 반으로 찢는 것입니다.
By the early 1920s, Adolf Hitler had also gained notoriety outside the party for his controversial speeches attacking the Treaty of Versailles and rival groups. On November 8th and 9th, 1923, confident of the support he was gaining, he attempted a coup d'état known as the Munich Putsch. However, the plan failed, for which he was arrested and sentenced to prison. At that time, no one imagined that they had behind bars the one who would be the most brutal dictator the world has ever known. On April 1st, 1924, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison at the Landsberg fortress. There, he received privileged treatment from the guards and was able to receive letters and visits from his admirers. He was acquitted and released on December 20th of that same year as part of a massive amnesty for political prisoners. In this way, he only served 9 months of his sentence. However, that time was enough for him to write his autobiography, My Struggle, which took a deeper look at his political ideology, including his plans for a future Germany and his virulent anti-Semitism. This book became the regime's manifesto and laid the groundwork for Nazi propaganda, the most effective tool of the era that lay ahead. After the failed coup d'état, Hitler came to the conclusion that the best way to achieve power was through parliamentary means, and to achieve that goal, advertising was going to be a fundamental weapon. The main propaganda organ of the Nazi Party was the newspaper People's Observer, the most hated newspaper in the country, as the leader described it in his speeches to stimulate sales. From its pages, the supposed great evils of Germany were denounced: the Treaty of Versailles, which they considered unjust and humiliating, the government of the Weimar Republic, which they called weak and incapable of getting the country out of the economic crisis, and the rise of communism, which they saw as a threat to the unity of the German people. In addition, they could not fail to attack the influence of the Jews, whom they blamed for all of the above. They pointed to them as supposed promoters of the treaty. They claimed that the economic crisis was triggered by Western Hebrew capitalism, and they linked communist Bolshevism with Judaism. The effect of this propaganda tactic on the people grew rapidly and was finally reflected in the success during the elections. After a long process, Adolf Hitler came to power.
El 30 de enero de 1933 es nombrado canciller. Los nazis imponen su dictadura mediante una operación de falsa bandera. Acusan al KPD de quemar el Reichstag y emiten un decreto que suspende derechos fundamentales y elimina a la oposición. Poco después aprueban la ley habilitante de 1933, que autoriza al gobierno a legislar sin intervención del Parlamento. La simiente del fascismo está plantada y el futuro de Europa y del mundo al borde del abismo.
With the Führer in power, another kind of construction began from Nazi propaganda. In the Third Reich, they promoted the image of a homely man and good neighbor to distance the dictator from his violent and cruel policies that would soon lead to the Second World War. In order for the strategy to be effective, both in Germany and abroad, work was done on different aspects. One of them was the radical change between the personality of a Hitler of humble origins and provocateur to that of a sophisticated and peaceful leader. The Nazis had elaborated a kind of myth about Hitler as a poor young man, accustomed to lack and with a certain disdain for comforts. This had been a reflection for many of his followers, who suffered in the period after the First World War. However, when Hitler became chancellor, and especially after the royalties from his book made him a rich man, he spent a lot of energy and money redesigning his residences, the government building in Berlin, his apartment in Munich, and his mountain house known as Berghof. This renewal was the opportunity to create an image of a diplomatic leader, refined and with good taste, softening his facade as an extreme anti-Semite and agitator of the masses. The press was again key. There was a boom in relation to celebrities, where ordinary people wanted to know what the daily life of the rich and famous was like. In this framework, they fed a false image of Hitler where only postcards of the leader in his mountain house were shown, with natural landscapes and moments in which children appeared playing and smiling about the splendid future that was promised to them. All the information that Nazi propaganda launched had an effect, even on the youngest followers who saw a promising future.
14살 인계보리 베버.
총통이 약속을 지키기 위해 요구한 4년은 이제 끝났습니다. 그가 이룬 것은 정말 대단한 일입니다. 공산주의자들은 독일에서 사라졌습니다. 실업은 없습니다. 총통은 우리에게 자존감을 되찾아 주었습니다.
The standard of living of the Germans improved dramatically through a combination of confiscated Jewish property and loans taken out abroad. Thanks to Hitler's renewed positive image, the Third Reich obtained funds for public works projects that created millions of jobs. And as if that were not enough, it could afford to pamper the population with aid that had not existed before, such as credits or tax reductions. Everything was progressing according to the Nazi leader's plan. His figure grew in support, and the subliminal message of a superior Aryan race that should guide the destinies of the world reached ever deeper into the popular mind. On the other hand, an enemy was also created in the Jews, considered a biological danger and responsible for all the evils that Germany had experienced. Soon, both ideas would be installed, to the point where a war would be the only option for a people blinded by the words of their charismatic leader. However, before reaching total chaos, some key pieces are missing to complete the enigmatic figure of Adolf Hitler. It has to do with his ties, and to begin with, we will focus on those followers who were always with the Führer and helped him carry out his most brutal plans. We are talking about the main Nazi leaders who accompanied the 12 years of government of the Third Reich, contributing from propaganda and convincing the people to the mass killing of people during the war and the Holocaust. An example of this are these words from one of the Führer's closest men, who in 1938 was striking the first blows before the outbreak of the Great World Conflict.
바이엘은 알프스의 높은 산 은신처에서 히틀러는 이미 다음 정복을 계획하고 있습니다. 나치 선전부장 요제프 괴벨스의 일기.
이제 체코슬로바키아가 차례입니다. 총통은 훌륭하고 진정한 천재입니다.
Figures such as Joseph Goebbels were instrumental in the regime of the Third Reich. The propaganda minister not only positioned Adolf Hitler as the savior of Germany, so that the people would support him to the very end, but he also closely followed the impact of each Nazi action to strengthen the Führer's discourse according to the reactions of the masses. In short, he was a great architect of the rise and seizure of power of one of the most famous dictators in history, but he also knew how to be one of the greatest followers of his leader's brutal war policies and supported him to the very end.
히틀러는 자신의 폴란드 파괴가 영국과 프랑스에 대한 경고가 되기를 바랐습니다. 그들에게 평화를 제안합니다. 그 제안이 기각되자 그는 분노합니다. 조셉 괴벨스.
총통은 잉글랜드가 KO를 당해야 한다고 믿습니다. 영국의 힘은 이제 더 이상 현실이 아니라 단순한 신화일 뿐입니다.
Despite the Nazi officials' thoughts, the Allied forces were determined to confront any kind of threat imposed by the violent German regime. Several countries suffered, as did all the enemies of the Third Reich, who were victims of the greatest atrocities known to humanity. It is time to move on to continue investigating Adolf Hitler's most private relationships. And it is here where we find one of the main female figures of Nazism, Eva Braun. Her relationship with the Führer began in 1929, when she was only 17 years old, and fell madly in love with the German leader, who was already a 40-year-old man with a growing political career. The young woman worked as an assistant to the official photographer of the Nazi Party, Heinrich Hoffmann, and was in his studio when the first meeting with Hitler took place. After meeting the Führer, Braun was captivated by his charisma and intelligence, and despite the age difference, she began to frequent him with the idea of establishing a romantic relationship. However, their story would be very complicated. The problem was not that the Führer found the young woman's personality unattractive, but quite the opposite. A woman like Eva could be a tempting distraction, putting his plans in jeopardy.
지능이 높은 남자는 원시적이고 어리석은 여자를 취해야 합니다. 제1을 방해하는 여자가 있다고 상상해 보세요. 여가 시간에는 평화를 누리고 싶습니다. 절대 결혼할 수 없었습니다. 영화 배우도 마찬가지입니다. 결혼을 하게 되면서 그는 자신을 사랑했던 여성들에 대해 뭔가를 잃게 됩니다. 그러면 그는 더 이상 그들의 우상이 아닙니다.
Hitler, who was known for his controlling and secretive nature, kept his relationship with Eva Braun a secret. He preferred to present himself as a single and selfless leader to the public and his followers, showing that his only love was Germany and its people. Although over the years the bond between the two became more serious, and even several Nazi leaders were aware that they were a couple, the woman felt that the leader of the Third Reich did not pay her enough attention and tried to commit suicide on 2 occasions, once in 1932 and again in 1937-1935. Neither of the episodes were successful, but they caught the attention of the Führer, who began to spend more time with her and worry about her well-being. Despite this, Eva Braun never held an official role in politics or in the regime, nor was she presented as Hitler's partner. She lived in Berghof, the mountain residence where the German ruler constantly visited her and was always away from state affairs. She became a figure known only within the leader's inner circle and was not publicly introduced until almost the end of the war. Even so, she showed her concern for Hitler. Her loyalty to the Führer was enormous, even though it was not at all reciprocated.
그동안 그는 머리가 정치로 가득 차 있었지만 이제는 조금 긴장을 풀어야 할 때입니다.
히틀러의 측근들만이 에바를 만날 수 있습니다. 그중 한 명은 히틀러의 절친한 친구인 건축가 알베르트 슈페어입니다.
자신의 감정을 그토록 거의 드러내지 않는 사람을 본 적이 없습니다. 에바를 대할 때도 그는 결코 완전히 편안하고 인간적이지 않습니다.
Now it is time to continue and look into another of the most relevant relationships of the Nazi leader, and it has to do with who was one of his great allies, Benito Mussolini. The Duce, as the main representative of the fascist party, became the ruler of Italy on October 31st, 1922. Like Hitler, he enjoyed great popular support and took advantage of the opportunity to establish a totalitarian regime. The dictator wanted to recover the greatness of the Roman Empire and expand his country's domains throughout the Mediterranean. That is why he joined the German leader in his plans to conquer Europe. The Italian army participated in several campaigns in North Africa, the Balkans, and southern Europe. They met in 1934 during a cordial meeting that marked the beginning of a relationship lasting several years, which was strengthened by their joint intervention in the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939. Both leaders were always accompanied in their meetings by the German translator, who was a key witness to this incipient relationship.
저는 이 두 사람을 관찰할 기회가 충분했습니다. 히틀러의 목소리는 거칠고 종종 쉰 목소리였습니다. 때때로 그의 눈은 빛났습니다. 그의 웃음에는 언제나 풍자가 묻어났습니다. 무솔리니가 히틀러를 파시스트 민병대의 명예삼경으로 임명하는 흥미로운 행사가 있었습니다.
On May 22nd, 1939, Germany and Italy signed the Pact of Steel, a military and political alliance that pledged to support each other in the event of war. This agreement formalized their collaboration and paved the way for the expansion of their aggressive agendas in Europe. The coalition also included Japan, forming the Berlin-Rome-Tokyo axis. During World War II, the relationship between Hitler and Mussolini was crucial in coordinating military strategies and campaigns. However, it was not always smooth. The Duchy sometimes felt pressured by the Nazis' ambitions and the course of war events. As the conflict progressed and the situation became unfavorable for this side, tensions between the two grew until an inevitable breakup. History showed that Adolf Hitler's war plans had a limit, and despite initial conquests, they could not overcome reality. The fierce resistance of the Soviet Union and the subsequent involvement of the United States in the European theater put an end to the Führer's ambitions. The end of the Nazi leader and his inner circle came in the spring of 1945. The first to fall was Mussolini. With the war lost, he tried to leave his country, but was captured by a group of communist partisans fighting against Italian fascism. They were in charge of shooting him on April 28th of that year in Giulino di Mezzagra, a small village in northern Italy. One day later, the last and tragic chapter of the relationship between Hitler and Eva Braun began. With the Red Army advancing through the city of Berlin, the couple married on April 29th in the Reich Chancellery. Only 24 hours after the brief ceremony, and to avoid being caught by the soldiers of the Soviet Union, they both committed suicide. A day later, on May 1st, 1945, Joseph Goebbels, faced with imminent German defeat, took the same path. He committed suicide with his wife after poisoning their 6 children. After 12 years of rule, the Third Reich ceased to exist, but not without having achieved enormous success in building a ruthless leader who presented himself as the great savior and convinced multitudes to support the massacre of millions of people. Now, after learning the secrets of Hitler's rise and the most important links he forged along the way, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you very much for having accompanied us to the end. We look forward to seeing you again in our next military history video.